Hello there, Boxen fans around the world. Thank you for joining us once again for another great discussion featuring Kristian from Boxen247.com. Across the pond and myself, Graeme from Talkin Fight. Whole new week, whole new issue to deal with. And today we're going to have a chit-chat about Mike Tyson. And if you were to go up, I'm assuming in his prime, if you were to go up against someone today in the heavyweight division, how would he fare? Let me start you off, everyone, by giving you a quote, a little paragraph from ESPN. They'll just set the tone for this discussion. For 6 rounds, the peak Mike Tyson was possibly the most devastating fighter ever seen. Although trainer Don Turner once reminded us after 6 rounds, he isn't the same. At his best, Tyson combined speed and power. Often he was right on the other man before the poor fellow quite knew what was happening, such as when he crushed Marvis Frazier in 30 seconds. It also helped that Tyson intimidated many of his opponents to the point that they were ready to be knocked out before a punch was thrown. Michael Spinks, Alex Stewart, and Bruce Seldon in particular. When Tyson knocked out Spinks in 91 seconds in 1988, he truly looked unbeatable, prompting the remark from Sugar Ray Leonard, "He was so destructive, he should be locked up." Veteran reporter Ken Jones wrote in the British daily The Independent that Tyson, quote, came to the ring with all the determination and pent-up energy that has helped establish him as perhaps the most intimidating force ever seen in boxing. And by the way, of the top 10 heavyweights of all time listed by ESPN, Mike Tyson is in fact number 1. Now, I do have a list, according to a reputable website, with respect to whom they consider are the top 10 heavyweights right now. So maybe, Kristian, before you might begin to have any comments on this, maybe I can just roll through that quick list for us. Just so we're not showing any bias at all whatsoever. Let me just read off the list. It's courtesy of sportinglife.com. And their top 10, by the way, does not include Robert Helenius, Filip Hrgovic, or Tony Yoka, people of that ilk. Their top 10 include number 10, Frank Sanchez, Michael Hunter, Joseph Parker, Joe Joyce, Andy Ruiz Jr., Dillian White, Deontay Wilder, who comes now in at number 4, Anthony Joshua, Alexander Usyk, Tyson Fury topping the list. So, Kristian, I put this back into your hands now. Where do we start? In his prime, Tyson Fury.
His prime
Mike Tyson
was very, very short, very, very short. It was. Let me just adjust the mic. I've shut up automatically for some reason. Okay, his prime was very short, and that was 1985 to 1988. Obviously, the Spinks 91-second blowout, and after that, he didn't do as well. So the peak finished there. And his peak was probably 1 or 2 fights before when he won the title against Trevor Berbick. Now, with what ESPN said, where they said he's the most destructive fighter or best fighter, whatever the words were you said, for the first 6 rounds, I agree with that. But I have to add for the second 6 rounds as well. Absolutely stand by that, and I will argue this point till I'm very red or blue in the face later on. The second point is when you were mentioning some of the names as you were going through the top 10 as that was seen, I was just cringing. I was just cringing and cringing until the time you mentioned Deontay Wilder. Once the caliber just comes up a little bit from the aforementioned Sanchez, Andy Ruiz Jr., etc. Up until then, all I could think of was this blowout, no chance, no hope, blowout. As per what we saw with Mike Tyson in his peak with every single fight, bar up until the James Buster Douglas loss. Only up until that point, 4 had gone the distance with Tyson. Now, I think Tyson is the best fighter ever. Shock, horror. A lot of people will be scoffing at the idea. But again, the first point I'm just going to say again is at his peak. Now, the problem is I hear a lot of people when they discuss the top 10 or when they discuss Mike Tyson, they tend to bring up fights. Oh, yes, but when he fought Evander Holyfield or when this happened or when that happened. You know, this was all in after 1990 or after 1988 when he was clearly past his peak. You know, as soon as he beat Michael Spinks in 91 seconds. He had 2 fights after that. Now, the first fight was against Frank Bruno, which he won in the 5th round. And arguably, Bruno gave him the biggest tussle scare. He caught Tyson in the 1st round that he had to back up, and Frank Bruno did sort of try and unload, but it didn't come to much else. But it was a spirited effort. That was probably one of the biggest chances that anybody stood up until that point. And because his trainer, Kevin Rooney, was out of the picture, who was there since day one. And, you know, the second fight after that was a 93-second blowout, which was against Carl the Truth Williams, RIP. After that, you had the 1990 Tokyo loss to James Buster Douglas. Now, the Tyson, we call it 2.0, which was after the loss. That fighter, up until, oh God, you had, how many fights did he have before he went down inside for the rape conviction? You had the return match, which was against former amateur foe Henry Tillman. You then had the, by the way, he was meant to fight Holyfield for the second time. For the first time, but it was the second attempt to actually make the fight, which got cancelled. It was actually announced, but shortly after it got cancelled. In came Razor Ruddock, who did actually very well at it. But again, Razor Ruddock, who I did, hope, or should I say, hold as one of the best fighters in that era. He went, I think it was 7 rounds with a controversial stoppage in their first fight, and it was a spirited effort in the rematch that went the 12 rounds as well. But that Razor Ruddock that put in a good effort and did reasonably well against Tyson, pre his decline, again, wouldn't have stood very long. Absolutely, and I stand by this. And even more the case when you had, obviously, then Tyson went into prison for the Desiree Washington rape case. He came out, and that was Tyson version 3.0. And that fighter still had some quick wins, like Bruce Seldon. He knocked out, regained the title. You had one off of Bruce Seldon. You had the rematch with Bruno, which lasted only 3 rounds this time. That is a greatly declined Tyson, and it is a shame that a lot of people use examples from that state or that part of his career and pit that against whichever fighter in time, when that fighter, especially 3.0, was clearly in decline. People used to say that, or if people do say that if he doesn't get you out in a short period of time, then the aggressive bully gets bullied. Well, no, in his peak.
Right.
When did that happen? Not one fighter was able to do that. It was just a case. It's not a case of whether they could put any stiff resistance up with Tyson. It's just a case of whether they could put any form of resistance. And prior to his defeat with James Buster Douglas, you had championship bouts which went the distance. There was 2 of them, which was Tony Tucker and Bone Crusher Smith. Prior to that, you had Mitch Blood Green, and you had I think Mitch Blood Green was the first. Was he the first one to go to distance? It's either that or it's James Quick Tillis. It's one of those 2, which is the first one. But there was 4 in total up until his first loss. That Tyson would have steamrolled, I think, anybody. And there's no way that the example, and I hear it time and time again, or read it time and time again as well, that if he doesn't get you out there quickly, you've got no chance. Well, there's no evidence in Tyson version 1.0 to support that whatsoever. Over to you, Graeme.
Well, so I'm going through the list of current heavyweights, and I assume when you said the best fighter ever, I assume you're talking about heavyweights, or are you talking pound for pound in all weight classes?
Oh, sorry, heavyweight, to be clear on that one. Absolutely. The raging Tyson, who was quick, had a good defense, who had a good chin, who was one of the hardest punchers in history. I am saying every single box was ticked at that point. There is not one area in his arsenal, apart from being short at 5'10", where there was any, everything was an A+. Everything was that. And there was nothing, and I'll argue this point with anybody, there is nothing at all. There is no evidence against any fighter to say that he was a bully that would run out of ideas or gas or anything past the sixth round. There's nothing to support that whatsoever. It's only when he was in decline that this started to happen, and it was a big decline. But the problem is that where he was the youngest heavyweight champion at age 20 when he won it in, was it November 1986 against Trevor Berbick, he was only 20 years old. And so a lot of people, because in his decline, he was still in his mid-20s, late 20s. And this is people are assuming that his peak's, still the peak because they look at the age when it wasn't. He was way, way, way past his best through training, through motivation, through inactivity when he's 3.5 years in prison, through completely abusing his body after Kevin Rooney was taken out of the corner, and pitting him in. And there's only a few which I would say would stand a chance, and that's when you were, for example, when you were counted down the top tens and you got to Deontay Wilder. It comes to Deontay Wilder. It's the case of could he land a lucky punch with the power that he did have. Now, one thing that made me, well, I was giving us a little bit of thought earlier. I was thinking, well, okay, let's just move on to Tyson. This is why I suggested, Mike Tyson for today, is because everyone is talking Tyson Fury. So I thought, okay, Mike Tyson, why not? Right. He's only one of possibly 2 or 3 fighters that would have stood a chance. But it's a case of, as we were speaking to the other day, which Fury, this heavier tank of a 6'9" object that seemingly can't be moved, or if it gets moved, it certainly goes back to where it was prior. Or if it was the masterful 6'9" boxer that beat Klitschko over in Germany.
Right.
Now, out of the two options there, I think the one that actually would have stood the best, or the best chance in winning, would be the one that was able to move and outbox and keep at range. And that fighter is the first one, the one that was masterful with all the feints, the rolls, the movement, and 6'9" with the reach, he would have caused anybody a problem. And out of everybody out there, I think he's the only one in that carnation as such, which would have caused a problem for Mike Tyson because of, he could keep at range if he could steal enough rounds, land and, hit and not get hit, then he could possibly win the fight. The heavier one, as much as he's supposedly now an immovable object, I just think that he would be more of a sitting duck at that point. As much as, yes, Tyson did struggle more with taller fighters, but he still didn't lose at his peak against taller fighters. But the Tyson now doesn't move as quick as he did against Klitschko. That just, for me, says one thing all over it, which is target. And a target that will not move in the same way Tyson would land. I don't think Tyson would knock him out, because if he had him down, Fury gets up. But certainly I think it would be a Mike Tyson victory. But the one which went against Klitschko, that I think out of everybody in history, I think is the one, and certainly that version of him is the only one that would have stood a chance. Moving on to other fighters of the current crop now, that the top of the tree, the Anthony Joshuas, the Usyks, anybody else, I just think it just would have been a Tyson victory. I cannot see it any other way whatsoever. No. Yes, he's my favorite heavyweight fighter. No, he's not actually my favorite heavyweight fighter, because it's Evander Holyfield and Michael Spinks. But
that's what you said.
I do respect the fact that in that short peak, in that 3-year period, unstoppable, the best. He had enough strength to mix it with the modern heavyweights now, even if the weight was low. At his average weight at his peak was about 216, 217. I cannot see it any other way, unless lucky punch from a big puncher like Wilder, because I can only assume that Tyson's, that gets confusing, we've got the two Tysons, Mike Tyson's chin, it was never tested in his peak. He got caught a handful of times, but that's about it. There was nothing, again, that was shown to prove that he couldn't take a punch or get up if he was punched, where Tyson Fury has demonstrated that at least if he does go down, he does get back up. He's not going to knock out Tyson, but that first carnation is the only one from the current crop that would stand a chance. None of them, nobody else at all would have stood a chance. Just my feelings, my view on it. Might be a little bit blinkered, but I think it is way blinkered by the people that when you look at Tyson now, and it's, as I said to you the other day, that I got drawn into. It wasn't the hype; it was just I was thinking emotionally. When, oh my god, Tyson Fury, one of the best ever. God, who would have beaten him? I did watch for the first time the other day a replay of the third fight. As great as it was, and one of the best slugfest heavyweights, fights that's ever happened. That's going to go up there in the top 10 for sure. The skill level, the speed that wasn't taking place, the open targets that I was looking at that would be made available for somebody, a sharpshooter that ticks every box like Tyson, would have got them. Okay, Wilder out of there, Fury, points verdict. Over to you. I know, very, very stubborn with that, and I did have changed my stance since the other day. But when you look at the skill level, Tyson, with the way he moves, with the way he throws the punches, now compared to against Klitschko, version 1, if you want to put it that way, completely different. And he needs, yes, he had a good 1-2, but he was very good with that. He was just two different fighters, and I think this weight thing, whether he, with Tyson Fury, whether he has to stay at that weight, because that is how his body has reacted after the 3.5 years off, and he has to keep it at that weight for his body to adjust and to be optimal without being completely drained after losing all that weight. Whether he has to be like that with every other fighter now, I don't know. Or this huge weight was designed to purely to be able to overpower, to manhandle Wilder. Now Wilder's out the way, I'm curious to see what weight Fury would come in for somebody else like an Anthony Joshua or a Usyk or even a Dillian White.
Right.
Yeah, we're very curious.
Yeah, that does make this next year very interesting. So I'm kind of curious then, just from a fantasy level here, a Back to the Future scenario. If you were to take back a 21-year-old from today, so put anyone of this current crop, or even current aged crop. So my example would be, I would take back in time Jared Anderson, who's 21, I think, unbeaten and is big and powerful, and I really like the way he boxes. I would take him back if I was to fly back to the future, if you will, and land in Mike Tyson's ring. That's the boxer I'd take with me, quite frankly. How about you?
The only one of now would be Fury, but the one which was
The
the
younger
boxer.
Fury?
Yeah, absolutely. Version 1. He's the only one that I would take back. And depending who he was fighting from the past, then that's with what weight I would, as such, if it was the imaginary trainer, whatever, I'd want him to come in at. I'm just curious to see how Fury's weight now goes, because it looked like when he was down at a lower weight after the 3.5 years. So when you look at the first Wilder fight or the Tom Shorts fight, even if he did win that in the 4th round, or where you had the Olo Watson fight. That was a very close fight, but according to his father, John Fury, apparently Tyson, he said that he was too weak, and this is why Ben Davison was taken out of the corner with the rest of it. He looked good, but he wasn't strong enough.
Right.
And I think that is purely just because, and I do believe this higher weight is going to have to be kept off now, because it's how his body has adjusted, having lost the 8 stone, whatever, after the 3.5 years. If you take it back to what you were, it is a straining your body too much. This is something, for example, where if you take Ricky Hatton, somebody else that blows up between fights, he had to keep coming back down to the same weight unless he was going to fight in a different division. And his body weakened. He was out the ring. He came back. He had one fight, and he was stopped by somebody which was not a heavy puncher, but the body couldn't take the weight loss. As an optimum premium fighter, he wasn't able to do that. Now Fury, because he's heavyweight, it's great because he went down to that weight. It appears that wasn't a successful weight. He came up in weight, and now he's put weight on, the bulk, whatever you want to call it, and he seems to be a completely different fighter.
Right.
Not a boxer anymore, but a slugger. I still don't think he's a puncher. It's not that kind of fighter now. He's more of a slugger. It's clubbing shots, but the way he just, in the second Wilder fight, the way that the punches were coming around are just completely different. I'd never seen the Fury, the first carnation of him. I'd never seen, him fight or throw punches in that way before. And to the layman, it looks like less skill, and it's just, he's scrapping his way through. Effective, obviously, with Wilder for 3 fights. Very effective with 2 of them. I think that's his weight now. But just coming away from that, the lighter Tyson, the first, I'll just say the Klitschko example. He's the only one. There's nobody else at all that I would dare take back in time with Mike Tyson. Now, other fighters that were champions, yes, because if you went with, I'm just going to go full extreme here, went in with the Rocky Marciano,
Right.
or Joe Louis, who was probably, you're 187 pounds, up to 190. You
Right.
wouldn't need to put on that bulk like he did with Wilder to manhandle him, because at that point you've got to outweigh them by over 100 pounds.
Right.
As much as it would be good, it would be unnecessary. I wouldn't like to see that, because his speed has been affected. Everything's been affected in this new way of his, and it is the weight that's done it. Because he did. Sorry, I will choose my words right here. He did appear to have the speed and reflexes and everything in his first, was it, couple of fights. I know it wasn't a good test. The first one was an absolute joke, but 3.5 years out the ring. The second one, limited opposition. But he still appeared there to be quick. He was in the corner and he was dodging the punches. It's like Ali versus Michael Dokes, where he's in the corner. The one in the video intro where he's there dodging, and then he wiggles his backside, and he's just missing the punches. Tyson Fury did a version of that in his second fight. That's it. I think Tyson, as Mike Tyson, would just be too much. He would land against I'm just repeating myself. He would land, and at 3 years, if he was able to land, he'd take you out of there. I'll argue the toss as such with anybody about this, and it's a little bit frustrating when, is it frustrating? Wrong word. Whatever. When you listen to somebody say, and they used examples, oh yeah, when he fought, Lennox Lewis, and he was taken out, was it the 7th round or something? But yeah, that was 2000. That was 2000, I think, or 2001. He was way, way, way past his best. Would it be? But he was in that fight purely for the money. That was it. He was very heavy, unnecessarily, because he was past his best. He would, unless he was only ever put back with his original trainer, who was sacked straight after the Michael Spinks fight, actually in the ring as well. The news coming from Don King. That fighter was long gone. You have to judge, if you're going to judge, Tyson and Mike Tyson fairly, it's got to be just before, a couple of fights before winning the title and through to the Michael Spinks blowout. And the problem is that you had the 2 fights after that. And like I said earlier, the Bruno fight, where he was actually caught in the first round. He was past his best at that point. The Bruno, prior to that, wouldn't have got caught. That wouldn't have gone 5 rounds. The next fight, where he was fighting Carl the Truth Williams. Now, this one was, people say, oh, yeah, but that was a quick blowout, 93 seconds. Okay, Carl Williams, RIP, was notably or notoriously chinny. But up until the point of getting caught and put on his backside before the ref waved it off, he was landing. Actually, he was doing well against Tyson, because Tyson at that point was past his best. All bad examples. He had a 3-year peak. Keep it to that. That is the only way and the only fair way, and to gauge how well he would have done against anybody else. I don't know why people do. They use examples, and it'd be, God, 10, 12, up to 15 years past his best. Unfair.
One of the interesting comments you made last week, which came up in our weekend discussions, not yours and mine, but with some of the other chaps. Basically, in a nutshell, you'd said the impact of Tyson Fury and his size might, in fact, change the heavyweight division going forward, where we might now start to see taller, bigger men fighting as not just a rule of thumb, but in general. So anyway, on the weekend, there was, in fact, a 6'9" heavyweight fighter going up against a 315-pound heavyweight fighter. Now, I can't remember the names. I didn't Google it before the show, but I don't know what card they were on. It might have been the Garcia card, but I'm not sure. But the point matter is I thought, wow, isn't that interesting? We were just talking about that the other day, about how the impact of a Tyson Fury's size, like both his height and weight, might impact the direction of the heavyweight division. And take a look at that. Literally a couple of nights later, on Saturday night, 2 nights ago, there you had it, a 6'9" fighter going toe to toe against a 315-pound tank. So
I do think they should introduce a super heavyweight division. I don't think it's quite right with adding the weight division lower down. For example, with the WBC, where they brought in obviously the Bridger weight, which is what,
Bridgerweight,
200 to 224. It's at the wrong end because yes, that's taking out some of the lighter ones at that end against the heavy ones, but they're all getting heavier, all getting bigger, all getting bigger. You're going to end up having 224 against 300 pounders. That's still
right.
too big a gap. You've got to have some kind of heavyweight should be 200 to maybe 240, 250 or something. Above that there should be a super heavyweight division. You know, it's weird because going back in time, if you go back to the 80s, big was regarded as 6'4". Oh my
Right.
God, yeah, Bone Crusher Smith, huge fighter, 6'4". Tony Tucker,
Right.
6'4", huge fighter. That was it. There was nobody else up until that point that was even on top tier level of that kind of height. It was unheard of. You know, you then had Lennox Lewis's come along, and it wasn't until, and I'm sure I've missed a fighter in history or something, but it wasn't until you had Vladimir Klitschko at 6'6" and Vitaly, who was 6'7", that all this changed with the size. They came along, they were assumed to be robotic because this is why anybody that was near that weight didn't even venture into boxing because of they weren't so athletic and they couldn't move, but they were. All the rest of it, and the rest is history with those two. But seemingly after them being able to, you know, when they came on the scene in, what was it, 97, I think, Vladimir turned pro. Other ones just started to sort of like come around. You know, you had Michael Grant, 6'9", even if he was chinny, which is a shame because he was very athletic. Chap who lost to Lennox Lewis in the first round, but he was 6'9". He could move. He had a good punch, athletic. He was good at basketball, obviously, but he just didn't have a chin, unfortunately. But other than that, he was a very good fighter. But all these big fighters started coming along, and now 6'6". Give it a short period of time, I think you're completely right. They're going to be 6'7" and 6'9", and yes, you know, they're big. I just think that, you know, where you put the division, how can you compare? Let's say, for example, down the line that they do one in between, say, the Bridger weight limit of 224 to 250 and call it, you know, Joe Blogg's weight, whatever. It's the wrong end of it because of by the term heavyweight. If you have a heavyweight who's averaging now at, you know, or could do very soon, averaging around a 250, 260, 270 plus,
Yep.
how can you compare them as fighters, as heavyweights, to any heavyweight as such in the past? You know, when discussing heavyweights, how can you say, you know, oh, Joe Louis would have done well, but hold a second, Joe Louis is probably a light heavyweight now. They're
Right.
just completely different weights. Rocky Marciano had a great, doesn't matter what Rocky Marciano had, he was light. You know, Muhammad Ali, as Cassius Clay, fought between probably roughly 190 and 201 max, I think he went up to, and then went back down. It just fluctuated. He came back, obviously, after 3.5 years. He was heavier. But it's just, they're not heavyweights. And a 190 Cassius Clay would not beat a 250-pound fighter that can move or punch to a certain degree. I think that, you know, it'd be like a little insect round something just flitting away annoying until they're able to land a punch. And I don't think it would take an exceptional modern heavyweight to beat these so-called great heavyweights from the past because they're just not heavyweights.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, if you take a look, just for example, if you take a look at other sports, and you brought up basketball, you can have any range of height and size, but they are all athletic, and they're all incredibly tall, by the way. But the same might be argued in American football as well. You have some incredibly tall, incredibly fast, incredibly athletic wide receivers in American football. You know, so as sports all morph and change, I mean, but as you were talking, the one sporting example that came into my tiny head was sumo. And when you take a look at sumo, not that I follow it, not that I understand the rules, but you see that classic picture of the absolute behemoth going up against the, I don't know, 200-pound guy. He looks absolutely tiny compared to, anyway, they go up face to face against each other, because I don't think there are any weight classes in sumo wrestling. But anyway, I just thought about that as you were talking, with respect to introducing more weight divisions in boxing, which I know there was a lot of argument against the Bridger, and it'll be interesting to see how that goes. But kudos for them to putting that dividing line there, enabling, I would think, heavyweights to be truly classed as heavyweight, not knowing or not anticipating whenever they originally introduced that or began to discuss it originally, not knowing that a fellow like Tyson Fury would come along in their lifetime and challenge what is considered heavyweight versus what might be considered a super heavyweight.
Well, the problem with the Bridgerweight is that the first thing is that the WBC should have talked to the other
right
governing bodies to see if they would follow suit, because right or wrong, you've got this new weight class, but none of the others are probably going to follow suit.
Right.
So it's just now just a WBC thing as opposed to something which is a generally regarded weight class.
Yep.
The other thing is that you're going to have out of shape old cruiserweights going for it, or you're probably going to have, and there's only a few of them, the good heavyweights that are just of a light that able to drop down. Say they could have been 225, and they could just drop down a little bit to reach the 224 divided line, obviously for the Bridgerweight. There's not many of them. I know Oscar Rivas is fighting. He was originally meant to be fighting Bryant Jennings for the first title. Jennings has come out. I'll be honest with you, hands up in the air, I've never even heard of the other fighter who Rivas is fighting now. But the point is, if you look at the top 10 Bridgerweight, the top 10 fighters, even to the point of Alan Babbage was recently, might not be now, but he was at number 6. To me, that says it all.
Interestingly enough,
in the world as a Bridgerweight. It's going to be like how the cruiserweight was back in time when it first came out, for a long period of time before it did actually sort itself out. When you had people like Carlos de Leon, Evander Holyfield come along and sort it out. But it's why Holyfield was able to go through it. Holyfield's a great fighter, but so easily, because the talent there at that time was they were just older light heavyweights or heavyweights that had just failed and were able to knock off a few pounds and get down there. But generally, if the weight loss to get down to, as is the case now, Bridgerweight, depending on how much it is, it's not going to be good, because it's going to affect punch resistance, as it does to a fighter when they drop weight. Again, an argument or discussion, should I say, I've had with many people. But if anyone wants to take me up on the discussion with that, has any fighter gone from heavyweight to cruiserweight and been successful? Because there hasn't been. Please find one. Whoever. There's many that have gone down there. And it's one of a very good example of this, actually. And I know we're going off topic as such, but Roy Jones, turned professional at light middleweight. He won titles, middleweight, super middleweight, light heavyweight. He then jumped up, missing cruiserweight, and he successfully took the title off of John Ruiz. But he then went from that, instead of defending it, which was a good or bad thing, because they did cherry pick the fighter right with that to win the WBA title. They did actually try and put a fight towards Tyson of then with Jones, which would have been interesting, because Tyson at that point was way past his best. But no, instead of doing that and realised that, hold on a second, John Ruiz isn't a typical heavyweight champion up here, he went back down to light heavyweight to fight Antonio Tarver. The first one was a disputed win for Jones. They had the rematch. Jones was knocked out in the second round, if I remember right. It was very early. And at that point, he was knocked out repeatedly because the punch resistance had gone, because he had moved down in weight. Now, somebody might argue that, hold on a second, that's somebody going up then back down. But I think it's actually even worse for a career heavyweight anyway, that's been at this weight, and even if they go down to cruiserweight, they are screwed, politely. And there is not one fighter I know of at all that's gone back down and been successful to any level, let alone won a title or mixed it with the best, or no, probably one of the first ones that did it, I think, was Leon Spinks. He didn't do well, where he would have been a very good cruiserweight, but he went up to heavyweight. It just screws you, especially the older you are as well, coming down. It doesn't work. It hasn't worked and won't work with anybody. But that's the Bridger weight and all that stuff out the way now. I stand by what I said. Mike Tyson, anybody in history, apart from Tyson Fury, the one against Klitschko. What is your views on what I've said there?
I'm thinking about what you're saying with respect to the various weight divisions. So I wasn't in favor of, and I've had this discussion on another panel with respect to the introduction of the Bridger weight, okay? Because I don't think there's any interest, if you will, in the subweights anyway. My interest is, I like to see best of the best, go toe to toe, and have a great fight. My favorite fighters are among the heavyweights. But let me just read you the opening paragraph of that ESPN article where I quoted earlier the author describing Mike Tyson. But anyway, his opening paragraph is this, and it's written by a fellow by the name of Graeme Houston. It's no secret why people love the heavyweights. More than in any other division, there's always the chance of a sudden and spectacular ending. I mean, how short and sweet is that in terms of describing why I love the heavyweights? So if you're going to introduce a super heavyweight class, I don't mind that either, because you're more than likely going to see a sudden ending in any event. But I'm not in favor of introducing subclasses enabling heavier fighters to simply lose weight and go compete in a lesser division, for lack of a better description. If you're going to challenge for a heavyweight championship, be a heavyweight. And as I inferred earlier with my sumo example, if you think you're a heavyweight and you can compete in a heavyweight, then be a heavyweight. But I'm not in favor of people dropping down in their weight to compete. I didn't know that. To compete. So our producers just chimed in and said sumo has weight classes. So I stand corrected, but I wish we could put up the example.
Well, that is either big or bigger. I think it's.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's
huge or huger. Yeah.
At the end of the day, if you're the, shall we say, the smaller man, and you think you can beat that bigger man, that should be up to you, really. In boxing, though, different. Anyway, we have our, if you will, classic divisions, and the most classic of all the divisions is the heavyweight, if you ask me. And I don't like the introduction of a subclass. In this case, the Bridger weight, or I'm not even a huge fan of the light heavyweight. But anyway, if you're heavyweight, you're heavyweight. I want to see heavyweights go toe to toe. That's what I do enjoy. I'll admit it. But I don't mind seeing other weight classes as well if it's the best of the best. The Spence and the Crawford type tips, the Canelos of the world. Those kinds of fellas are in tip-top shape, best in class, and I don't mind watching their fights. But when it comes to weight classes, no. I mean, but as I see the heavyweights moving up, then maintain that class as heavyweight. But introducing super heavyweight now, and I have to think about that one.
It's good enough for the amateur Olympic system, super heavyweight. Why not? The term professional, when you go from super heavyweight to heavyweight, and the heavyweight Olympic fighter will then probably be a cruiserweight or a light heavyweight. From the off, it seems not right to me. And practice. So just on the outside, just from the off, it looks wrong. But at the weight, it's going to be, you will see this, it's going to be out of shape or old or fighters coming back, cruiserweights coming into that division that could no longer have, with the way their bodies were and the work ethic and everything else, that, weren't able to make weight, or if they did, they'll be completely drained, are going to come back and fight at this new weight. I think that's going to happen a heck of a lot. Yes, there's going to be some small heavyweights. For example, Oscar Rivas, a case happened to drop to go down to there. That shouldn't affect him too much no, because he was only a little bit heavier than that. But again, no disrespect to Alan Babbage, but should not be a world rated number 6 at anything. But that, for me, from a skill level, shows what the competition is like in this Bridgerweight division. Yes, over time it changes, because cruiserweights first off was a bit of an odd one, but it soon sorted out and has landed up being actually quite a good division. I don't think the rest of them are going to follow, and I don't think personally in 10 years' time you will have a Bridgerweight. You probably have heavyweight, super heavyweight. I think it seems the logical way to go, because they are getting bigger. So
Right.
why have to put the division in lower when they're getting bigger? So so they're bigger heavyweights. So you have super heavyweight, as you do in the Olympics. It seems a no-brainer. I can't see why else they would do it. At least you'd be able to gauge a heavyweight now to a heavyweight 10 years ago, 20 years ago.
Right.
Maybe not.
Rock solid point there, Kristian. That was good. You get one occasionally.
Yeah, no, and luckily, just back to Mike Tyson. Luckily, he was very strong for his low weight, because now, if he was fighting for a WBC title, it would be Bridgerweight. God, there'd be nobody ever there'd be able to resistance. It'll take 30 years before that happens from that division, because it's going to be a very significant. If you look down, I have to look at the ratings again. I've only ever looked at it, I think, once, and it was just no good. And what you're going to find that's going to be counterproductive is you're going to have that, because it's no good, the pay isn't going to be that good. So the division, just with the WBC, isn't going to attract anything or anybody with talent anyway. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword there, where I don't think it's going to go anywhere very quickly unless they all do it, which is, I don't think, going to happen. I think if they would have done it, they would have done it from the outset. And I don't think the rest of them are going to, all right, we're going to change our weight, our weight system because the WBC did. Really? I can't see them. I think they're safe face there anyway, and sort of stop that. No, I can see it being super heavyweight in the future, because they seem to be getting bigger and bigger and better at this bigger weight. You've had Value, a bad example, but he's still at his 7 foot. Was he 7'1" or 7'2", whatever? He won just because he was big, but he's still, bearing in mind how big he was still able to move better than a 6'6" person from, maybe say, 30 years ago, for example. So what is changing? Because I know that where we've said on past videos that the training and the supplements and everything else is changing, but how does it change? I don't know. This is where my lack of experiences is with, in the training, in the whatever, that enables such a big person to move better. It's one thing being strong or this or that, but they're moving. Tyson Fury, is he an exceptional case that you're never going to get again? Or is this going to be a norm? Maybe not now, but in the future. Curious to see which way it goes, because, Tyson Fury, probably, bar maybe a Mike Tyson, a Lennox Lewis, maybe Klitschko's possibly, but have to be the right Vladimir Klitschko, for example. I know he's already lost to, Tyson Fury, but, for example, the Tyson Fury who's heavier, I don't think would have beaten the Klitschko, or certainly Klitschko in his prime, after going with Emmanuel Stewart. Maybe not, maybe a close fight. Who else are you looking at? Obviously, the natural choice to make a comparison with is going to be Vitaly. Now, that Vitaly Klitschko versus Tyson Fury now would have been a great fight. And that is a fight they'd just be both throwing God knows what at each other. That is one fantasy fight, if it's ever possible with computers in the future to do it or whatever, and I'm sure it will be. That would be one fight I would love to see. Who would win that? I'll be honest with you, don't know. But that would be a good fight with the two styles there, with the way Vitaly Klitschko and Fury now. That would have been a very good fight.
One of the topics that we brought up on the Friday night panel featuring Tim Witherspoon was the lack of trainers, qualified trainers that understand not only the traditional, shall we say, historic style of training, but also if you meld that with today's technology that's available and also the videos that are available compared to what was once available, which was nothing. He was saying that there's a terrible lack of really good trainers out there, given the number of boxers, qualified boxers that are out there right now. And because we were talking about the training that went into the Wilder versus Fury fight, and who were these guys at the end of the day, you know? So anyway, so it's a topic I think perhaps for another day, but you know, the trainers do have a lot to do with these 6'9" fighters who are now moving from sluggers to fighters to boxers, obviously. And I think Tyson Fury is a great example. And is he going to set the tone now for a next generation of big men who can fight and box?
Jared Anderson, he was what was his weight the other day when he fought? Was it no, he was 17 stone. So he's up there with the bigger guys now. He could move, and without repeating myself, because I was saying this the other day, I know the fight the other day against the champion was fighting, it was limited opposition and was a stationary target. But it's sometimes obviously not about who you fight, but the way in which it was done. And he looked really good, better compared to some of the other fights I've seen him in. Definitely one for the future. But yeah, he's going to come through. How tall is he?
Jared Anderson, you got me on that one.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, he's tall. Again, it's going to be another tall 17 stone fighter that's going to tick most boxes. It's got to be around that mark. They're, you know, that's another one that's going to come through. They're all taller, moving. Hrgovic, I actually remembered his name today.
Sorry, he's only 6'4".
Short for today's standards, but that would have been a big fighter if we go back to the 80s, moving into the 90s. Yeah. But it's as if now, you know, no Usyk was an exception, but it's as if you've got to be at least kind of sort of 6'3" now before, you know, to be having that big deficit. I know it doesn't, you know, always work with how the reach is with the height, but generally the taller you are, the bigger reach you're going to have.
Right.
You know, it's as if you've got to have a tall fighter to have the good reach to be able to mix it with the best now. Otherwise, you've just got that big deficit before power, skill, and anything else comes into it. You know, reach, the long levers. And they all seem to have it. I mean, Hrgovic is quite tall. I'm still not fully convinced with him yet, though I do wish him to be a good fighter because there's similarities there with Vitaly Klitschko.
Right.
Now, I don't know if Chin is going to be sorted out yet because he hasn't really fought anybody of any stature. But they're all coming through. They're all bigger, harder punching.
Yep.
It is exciting times, and I'm curious to see how it goes in the next 10, 20 years. I'd love to just flash forward just to see what they're like. You know, probably turn out they're all 5'10". No, they're bigger, moving quicker, punching harder, and certainly heavier. My God. But if Tyson Fury is going to fight next, I would love to know what weight he's going to come in at. Because I know with Wilder 3, he had that sort of bag of milk physique but he was, 277, wasn't he?
Yes.
His weight. Now, there was a few pounds over how he was in the Wilder 2 fight. But that didn't, to me, just look like 7 pounds worth of extra whatever wibbling at the side, because those handles, not that you need to be a bodybuilder to be good at boxing, but what weight? That was unnecessary. That, I think, was possibly a not so good training camp, because you heard my views on that from what I heard, obviously, from inside there, that it wasn't harmonious, even if people were saying it was. It definitely wasn't. I think that's why he came in at 277, because why not come in what you were before? Because he was the man that was after Wilder, the one that was given the short straw as such. That's why he came in so good with the second one, but then a little bit more complacent for the third one. If he came in against either Usyk or AJ, I'd love to know I'm so curious about that. I'd love to know what the idea and the plan is with his weight, because weight, it appears, does play a part in the way. Obviously, with weight comes training, but it does definitely prove a big thing within him as a fighter, because of the time he struggled in his career has been when his weight's been heavier, when he's underestimated a fighter, or as the story goes with Fury, that he moved from trainer to trainer to trainer before he settled down with Peter, his uncle. His weight was all over the place. He was 1 minute with this trainer, with that trainer just wasn't motivated. There was all sorts of stories coming over, and his weight reflected it from time to time. You'd never want to come in, as it appears, how he was, in that first Wilder fight. Don't know. Curious. The reason why I just say that, and the reason why I'm curious, is to see effectively then. So if we call in Fury now as Fury version 2, for example, or version 3, actually, because he's gone away, he's come back. It wasn't good, so that was 2. So version 3, this new heavier Fury.
Right.
Is that the weight that's going to be here to stay? Because if it is, then that will affect, and certainly in my world of how I see things, take it or leave it, it's got to affect how his performance against these fighters coming through, if he ever does fight these fighters, younger ones coming through, which I don't think he is, because I think you're just going to get the fight against AJ or Usyk, and that will be him. He will sail off into the sunset, have a tequila or 10 on the beach, as you said,
Yes.
and enjoy life, knowing that he could probably come back over the next few years and do it all over again, and probably win, which you'd probably maybe be able to do. Maybe his body's already had that big strain and shock to the system. Maybe he can do it again. But no, the weight is a key thing. I'm so curious. My guess is that he would come somewhere 7 pounds, like he was in a Wilder 2 fight. That appears to be his premium weight now, all things considered, with everything that he has done. But he certainly wouldn't want to come in how he was with this extra 7 pounds, because as much as he got a good victory, it was a great fight and all the rest of it, same as Wilder. I think it was 2 fighters, and this is why it gelled so well as well, is you had 2 fighters that weren't actually at their best. Fury was not the Fury you saw in the second fight or the first fight or against Klitschko, whatever. I know the style is completely different, but he was slow the way he's throwing his punches. You compare the two fights from 3-2. It seems they're completely different, and it wasn't as good. Wilder came in 7 pounds heavier. The stamina went very quickly, but it gelled and made a bloody good fight. So, not that I would have wanted that to be any different, but I certainly think that those two, again, if they're fighting anybody else, Wilder certainly wants to go way back to what he was. But again, now he's gone up in weight. And every time somebody mentions, he just needs to go back to what he was, and then go in with the likes of AJ or whoever, because they probably beat them all. Yes, but how is his body going to react now? Bearing in mind he's 35.
Right.
The older you are, and when you drop back in weight, and again, I'll discuss this with anybody. Maybe I'll get some examples. I can give you some off the top of my head, but really look into it, because nobody has gone back in weight again that's been successful. And I think if Wilder went back to, what's he going to have to knock off his weight? He was it 7 pounds more than how he was in the second one, but in the second fight he was something like a stone more than the first one.
Wow.
So now, and it's muscle as well. It's not just like a bit of extra around the side that this needs to be sort of trained off. He's now got to lose, if he does go down to what he was, which is the general consensus for everyone out there that needs, for him to be able to do what he wants to do and keep in the mix and be as effective as he was. He's got to lose 1.5 stone of muscle.
Right.
That spells one thing to me, if that's the case. Whiskers will not be as good, and you will see a very quick end to his career. And I think now that he's in a bit of a situation, the more I think about it, that he shot himself in the foot now, and it's as if he's gone up in weight. He's got to sort of hang around that weight.
That's right.
So if that's the case, now you're going to know that Wilder is going to gas at whatever stage. So we've got to do is, the game plan is you go in there to take him into that second half, into the deep waters, and you see that Wilder will gas very quickly, as was the case with Fury.
Right.
He's only going to gas quicker as coming into a fight where he's got knocked out, and after the fight before it was a heavy beatdown, and he's only getting older. Going back to the conversation the other day, should he retire? Yes, I think now definitely with this looming and what he's got to do with his weight, that's muscle he's got to lose to be as effective. He might come in, say, he returns, say, next year against, Joe Bloggs. What weight is he going to come in at? Because I don't know one person that said that, yeah, that weight was right for him. Everybody is saying that he came in too heavy, and that is why I gassed. And that's why I said, I'm just not trying to sort of, up myself, but that is why when he weighed in, I went straight to Twitter, no, he will gas quicker, and he's going to take away some of the advantage that he had with the speed, because with the speed came the punch. Even the punches that he put Fury down with, they weren't those typical wild swings, quick punches that he were able to put in. They were very short ones.
Yeah.
It's the both of them fought differently to how they'd fought in the past, and that is why it made such a good fight. It's something where I think if they had a fourth fight, and everyone would expect a replay of the third one, it's not going to take place. It won't happen. That was just them, both of them an extra 7 pounds on. One was, more muscle. One of them had some more milk on the side, and that gelled great. But it doesn't mean the next fight, if they ever had one, which I doubt, but you're not going to get a replay of the third one. Why should it happen? Because I don't think their weights would be the same. I think Fury knows what his optimum weight is. That's how it was in the Wilder fight. It appears that Wilder's one is back there. That's going to be problematic for him. And at this point, my God, I can't believe the time.
You've done it again.
Yeah.
So to answer the question of the day, the answer to the question is
Mike Tyson is the best ever, and that's about it really. Apart from Tyson Fury against the Klitschko, he's the only one that stand a chance. Mike Tyson, short peak, 85 to 88. Anybody?
Yeah. All right. Cool stuff. Thanks very much. Yeah. No, that's a great.
Take care.
Great swath of insight that you've provided. Absolutely, you're a wealth of knowledge and fun to talk to.
I'm awake.
Yeah. All good stuff. Thanks very much.
No energy drink today. That's why. Take care. See you tomorrow. All the best.
Cheers. Bye bye.